We are, thanks, Betsy. So we are here for session 8 today, 8 out of 10. So we only have 2 more group sessions today after this. We have a lot more meetings. You might remember that our plan sort of shifts. We did a lot more content at the front end, and we'll do a lot more individualized one-on-one meetings over the course of the next few months because you all are actively working on your projects. So we'll do analysis and reporting and sense making of all of that. So we still have a lot of touch points, but we only have 2 more sessions after this, those types of touch points. So we're rounding third base or whatever. I'm not a baseball person, whatever that analogy is, when it comes to our content. So real quick, instead of a real icebreaker today, we're gonna actually get some updates from all of you. But before we do that, just as a quick gauge of how everyone is feeling, go down to the bottom of your Zoom box, and there's an option down there that should say reactions. Click on those reactions. You should see claps, thumbs up, hearts, celebration. Those 3 little dots give you a whole bunch more. Pick a smiley or emoji or reaction that symbolizes how you are feeling. Oh, Vic Marie's ready with the sleep face. That symbolizes how you are feeling right now. Let's just get a quick pulse check on everybody. I'll do it too. I see a thumbs up. I see a sleepy face. Luciana, what is that face? What does that mean?
It's Monday, Tuesday for me.
Yeah, fair. Aisha, I see yours. Ashley, yours disappeared. Was it the little alien one? Tell us what that means.
Because it's foreign being back at work after a long weekend.
Yeah, I hear that. This is like the most Mondayest Tuesday ever. So I'm seeing a lot of those faces. I'm seeing some sleepy faces. I'm seeing a couple of thumbs up and happy faces, but we'll try and we've got 3 hours together. It's a big chunk of time for a Monday, Tuesday morning. So let's try and have some fun with it. This is a content area that can be tough for folks, right? More analysis. So let's see, I promise the more active you are in the session, the faster it will go and the more interesting it will be. So let's try and make the most of it together. I'm excited about it. I had my giant water bottle already this morning. I'm ready to go. I'm revved up. Let's go through our agenda real quick. I'm going to share my screen. Do you all see that? Great. So here's what we've got covered or covering. We're going to go in a minute into our team huddles for just 5 minutes. I'll tell you what we're going to do there in a sec. Then we're going to talk about qualitative analysis, what we do with all those words and sentences. We'll do like a big chunk of content. It'll be heavy for a little bit. Then we'll do an activity. We'll take our break. We'll do another activity. So we'll sandwich the break with 2 activities. And then we'll talk about data visualization for qualitative data. Remember last time we talked about bars, charts, and graphs, and pie charts, and that kind of thing. We'll talk about how we display qualitative data, give you a little bit more time in your groups, and then wrap up. Sound good? All right. So giving you 5 minutes in your team. So Monica will beautifully behind the scenes, gracefully put you all in your teams. And send you off into breakout rooms in a second. In those 5 minutes, I'm asking that you do 2 things. The first is that you are going to collectively plan a very quick, literally 1 minute. We don't have time for more than that. 1 minute update on where your group is right now with your data collection and evaluation project. So it could be, hey, we're doing surveys and focus groups. We started collecting data last week. We're hoping to be done collecting data in August, right? Like there's my update. So plan a quick update so we can go through and give everyone an opportunity to update on where we are. And then either at the end of last week or yesterday, I sent you all feedback to your analysis plans for anyone that sent them over. I think that's everybody. So start looking through that feedback if you haven't yet already. You probably haven't if you were out yesterday. Start looking through that feedback on your analysis plan. as a group, and make sure you have that ready to go for later. So plan your update, start looking over your survey analysis, plan feedback, and then we'll pull you back in to our big group in 5 minutes. Okay? All right, let's go. Let's do some updates on where everybody is. We'll actually need a screen share for this so we can see each other. I'm going to ask folks to update based on the order that I see them on my screen. So we'll just go one organization at a time. So let's start with the first group that I see, which is Connecticut's. How are you doing? Where are you in your process?
So we have finalized our surveys, we've administered our surveys, and now we're starting the process of doing the evaluation part.
The analysis?
The analysis, thank you.
You look so happy about it. Did you finish all your observations too?
Yes.
Great, good work. Up next, I see Danielle and Sheena, Girl Scouts.
Hi, good morning. So we had a great meeting with Elena last week to go over our registration data and how to sort of start combing through that. Camp has not started for us, which is who we're going to be surveying. So we haven't administered surveys yet, but the survey itself is ready to go for when camp starts, which will be the first week of July. But in the meantime, we're starting to comb through the registration data, separate it how we want to, start looking at the different groups that we want to analyze. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Good work. CERC team, I see you up next, Christy, Crystal, Kara.
Morning. We have administered our survey to the staff about our staff evaluation process. So we are going to start analyzing that data coming up, and then we are hoping to bring that back either with more questions through focus groups or in some way share it out with staff to get some more input as well in the early fall.
Great. How's the response rate on your survey?
Good. We had 35 out of 42 people.
Great. Really good. YWCA team, Tina, Luciana.
We've rolled out the survey, but we're still kind of in the preliminary. We've only collected like a small handful, so.
Good. That one, when you have surveys all that that aren't tied to a specific time period, but instead to an event, like the YWCA team, it's when people are exiting, right? You have a wider and a broader window of when you're going to be collecting data, because it's not happening in July, it's happening when this other event happens. It's triggered by this other thing. So that data collection window will be much, much longer or bigger. So it requires patience. Hartford Performs team, you're up next.
Okay, so far we've collected all of our surveys from our teaching artists, Hartford Public Schools students and teachers, and we've also taken our data already and taken our analysis and findings and put it into a visual brochure that we will later on in this week go and present to HPS admin and principals. So that's where we are in our process.
Very cool. If that's something that you're willing to share out, that visual with the group, please send it over to me and we can send it out to everybody.
No problem.
Yandidis, are you here? Mutual Housing? I don't know if she can hear us. We'll come back. So then we have Lutz Museum.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's Patricia Buxton, Claire Mazer. We are applied for Summer in the Museum grant. That's going to start in July. And as soon as we get those people through our front door, they're going to be getting our survey.
Perfect. So as you can hear across all of our, did I miss anybody? I think we got everybody. Yeah, we got everybody. As you can hear across all of our groups, everyone is in various phases of data collection or starting to or delving into analysis. So Danielle referenced the meeting that we had last week, in addition to any one-on-ones that we all have scheduled. So we'll have one in July, we'll have one again, we'll have them scheduled throughout. Reach out at any point if you want to talk more directly about the analysis part that you're working on, right? So we set up the curriculum and the syllabus to generally align with the process, but some folks will be further ahead in some areas, further behind in others. So if you're working on something that we either haven't talked about yet or talked about a while ago and want a refresher, or something that's tangentially related, something that we haven't directly talked about, just send me a message and we can meet separately about all of that. That's at any time. So you do not need to wait until our structured one-on-ones for that. You just have to communicate with me. All right, let's jump in to qualitative data. And we're going to start with a poll. Have you ever analyzed qualitative data? If you say sort of, please use the chat to explain what you mean. A few more people, waiting for a few more people. What's your guess? How many people do you think, what percentage of our group do you think has done this? Unmute and take a guess.
55%?
55? Was that the guess?
Yes.
Give me one. Yep, give me one more guess.
70?
That makes me smile. Because the answer, oh, go ahead, Tina. What do you got?
I said 70.
You said 70? So the answer is right in between those two. We have 60%. So 9 out of 15 of you said you've done this before. 4 people said, about a quarter of the group said they have not. And then 2 people were unsure. My guess is you've done it. And you might not even know that you've done it. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we're talking about analyzing qualitative data. Once we collect data, right, this will sound hopefully pretty familiar. We analyze them, we summarize those results into findings. So the findings are the things that are after the data are analyzed. We then convert those findings into a format that we can share with others. So once we have findings, they're usually pretty ugly, and then we have to make them digestible, presentable. That's when we talk about graphs and charts and headlines and bolding text and that sort of thing. And then ideally, we internally come up with some action steps, what we're going to do based on what we learned, right? As you'll remember from last time, we talk about using data to inform action. So now that we know X, we will do Y. This is where it becomes really important. All that work that you all have been doing around this project and any evaluation work that you've done before is usually with an end in mind. You're not doing it just because you're interested in research, right? You're doing it because it's going to help case make when you're applying for grants and funding and support and getting cheerleaders out in the world, and or because you're going to learn from it to make your work and programming and activities even better. So that actionable part is where it becomes, where the rubber hits the road and it becomes really important. So qualitative data in particular, when we're talking about qualitative data, we're talking about what? What is like the one word that we could use when we're talking about qualitative data? Throw it out there.
Analysis.
Even before the analysis, the data themselves are what? Quantitative are typically numbers, so qualitative are what?
Words.
Words, right? Whenever we're talking about information that we collect that is primarily based in words, we're talking about qualitative data. That can come from surveys, that can come from interviews, that can come from observations, that could even come from record reviews, pulling existing records that you have and looking at them, right? It can be things like descriptions of a situation, descriptions of events, descriptions of people, interactions that we've had, behaviors that we see, It can be quotes. So when you ask people about their experience and they tell you a story about it, or they share something that happened. It could be people's attitudes, their beliefs, their assessments, and their thoughts. And it can be excerpts. This is where we talk about record review. So if you pull excerpts from documents, from correspondence, from history, from field notes, from performance reviews, right? Those are all examples of qualitative data. I keep a folder in my inbox that I call a confidence booster. And if I get a really good email, right, from a partner or a client or a friend that makes me feel good, I save it in that confidence booster folder. I could pull all of those emails from my confidence booster folder and do qualitative analysis on them if I wanted to, right? And get some ideas and themes, some things that are consistent across all of them to make myself feel good about what's good about me, for example. All of that would be qualitative data. When we collect and we analyze qualitative data, we can help answer questions as to why. So we talk about quantitative, we talk about numbers telling us what. They tell us what happened, what something is, counts, totals. Qualitative data usually helps explain the why that's behind the what, right? So explains, gives further explanation or context or color as to the why that is behind the what we just learned. So in your survey, if you have a question like, did you like this program? Yes or no, right? You're going to count the yeses and the nos. That's quantitative. And then you might have a follow-up that says why or why not. The why or why not, where they write in their explanation as to why they liked it or why they didn't, that is qualitative. Does that distinction make sense? It's important to make that distinction because we analyze those data in two different ways. If you have a yes/no question, how are you analyzing that data typically? Did you enjoy this program, yes or no? How are you going to analyze that? Unmute, yell it out.
A percentage of how many said yes or no.
Exactly, right? You're going to count how many people answered the question. And out of those, how many said yes? So 10 out of 20 said yes, cool, 50% liked it. 10 out of 20 said no, 50% didn't like it, right? So when you have something that you're counting, you're just going to calculate that, it's math. When you have qualitative data, this is why it's important to know what's quantitative and what's qualitative. When you have qualitative data, you're not adding up numbers of things. You're reviewing those text segments and you're looking for commonalities in them. You're looking for, we call those themes. You're looking for themes. Is there something consistent in what people are talking about when they say why they liked it or why they didn't? Could we come up with a couple of overarching statements that reflect the majority of what we're seeing here? Picture the idea of qualitative data, the best visual, because I'm a visual learner, the best visual that I picture when I'm thinking about qualitative data is like a really, this is actually maybe not a great visual, a really wet towel, like soaking wet towel. And you wring it out and you wring it out and you wring it out and you're trying to reduce the water out of it, right? What you're ultimately trying to do is take all of these text segments that you have and reduce them down. 20 people say 20 different things. If we wring those out and keep wringing those out and keep wringing those out, what is actually at the root of this? What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that these people are actually saying to us? That's what we're trying to do. We're funneling it in to a couple of statements. You with me? Cool. All right, let's keep going. So we collect evaluation data. There are 4 primary ways that we collect evaluation data, regardless of whether it's qualitative or quantitative. Who remembers those 4 primary methods? Yell them out. We just talked about them on the previous slide. How do we collect? There's one that you all are doing. What are you all doing as part of this? Surveys. Yep. So surveys is one. What's another?
Record review.
Record review. Observations, there's one more.
I'm trying to
Marie nails it.
the group.
Oh, yeah, focus groups and interviews, right?
Yes, I'm like,
So-
I can't think of the word.
You got it. I knew what you meant. Surveys, interviews, or focus groups, right, which are group interviews, observations, and record review. These are our 4 primary data collection methods. It's not a trick question, right? Regardless, these are our 4 primary data collection methods. So all of them have their limitations and benefits. All of them, this is super important, y'all. All of them can be quantitative or qualitative. People assume that things are one or the other. Every single one of those can be qualitative or quantitative or both. And they all require some front end work. You know this because you've done it. You've designed the instrument, you've tested the instrument. You're thinking about or have thought about how you're going to analyze, how you're going to administer the instrument and how you're going to analyze it. So the reason these 2 are in green, hopefully you can see that interviews and observations are in green. The reason these 2 are in green is because they tend to sway more qualitative than quantitative. Do they have to be exclusively qualitative, exclusively numbers? No. But they tend to sway more qualitative. So we're going to spend a little bit of time right now talking about how we analyze interview and focus group data and talking about how we analyze observation data. Almost all of you, I might be able to say all of you, but I can't say it with certainty. So almost all of you have at least one qualitative element in your survey as well, right? Does everyone, if you have an open-ended item in your survey, something where people are typing something in or writing something in, raise your hand real quick. Yeah, I thought so. I'm pretty sure everybody has at least one of those spaces, even if it's something like anything else you want to tell us, or any feedback that you have for us, or any other comments that you have. If you have any space like that, you have at least one qualitative element in your survey. And then some of you have interviews and observations and record reviews on top of that too. So you'll see something relevant here. So when we talk about observation data in particular, right, I'm going to skip these real quick. So surveys, again, tend to focus on frequencies and crosstabs, but they can have qualitative elements. Interviews focus on themes and quotes. Observations focus on descriptions and can also include counts. So how many of you are doing observations as part of your evaluation project? Off the top of my head, it's at least 3 groups. Maybe 4, yeah. So in your Khalifa, in your observation tool, do you have any counts? Are you counting anything?
Yes, like the number of students that are in the space and those sort of things. Yeah.
Yep. So most times we have at least one thing that we are counting in an observation. It could be the number of people that we're observing, it could be the number of times that we see something happen, right? And then we also typically have some description where you're explaining what you're seeing. Observations, as you all know, can be very labor intensive, but you get rich data from it because you get both qualitative and quantitative data. So let's talk a little bit more about what we do with observation data. So when we're analyzing observation data, the basic takeaway here is that we are reading, rereading, reading again, everything that we have, and we're looking for some summary statements. Again, this idea of we're wringing out this towel, right, to keep just the stuff that's really central. We're making some summary statements about what we're seeing in that observation. This is an example of what we might see as a summary statement from an observation. Every time we visited the program, the majority of the children were involved in a literacy development activity, such as reading, illustrating a story they had read or written, or practicing reading aloud. To get to a 1-sentence statement like this, you have to go through a whole bunch of observation protocols, right? Completed guides. Because what do you see? What do you see embedded here that tells you that there's more than one observation that happened? What do you see embedded here that tells you that multiple observations happened? Bless you, Tina.
Every time we visited.
Yeah, every time we visited the program is a clue. That tells you that multiple observations have happened. Just in that little bit of a statement. This isn't based on one. How many students did they observe? How many children? Go ahead, Crystal.
It just says the majority.
So we don't have a number yet, it's unclear, right? So they don't say, but we know that they've observed multiple children because there's a majority. We're actually going to talk about that in a little bit. It's called enumeration when we put numbers to that. But we know that they observed multiple children on multiple occasions. So it's a summary statement because it's taking multiple observation protocols, completed ones, and they're looking across them and saying, look, when we look across all of these, here's what we saw. So every time we came, we saw that the majority, whatever that number is, the majority of children were doing one of these things. To help illustrate those summary points, we usually include snippets, excerpts, quotes, etc. So if this were in a report, we might have something like what the italicized text is here, and then we might have a sample, right? It might be a photo of one of these things happening, or it might be one of the observers' notes, right? In a little pull-out box that talks about when they went on Tuesday and how they saw this student illustrating a story that they read. And it just adds context or layering to the summary statement. We'll see more of that in a little bit too. Here are some other examples of what we might see after we read through and summarize observations. So here's a sample observation result summary statement. There was a maximum of 15 participants in the room and a minimum of 9 participants. About 13 stayed for most of the training. Some left or were there intermittently throughout the session. At least 5 different people uninvolved in the training passed through the room. The room was set between the front entrance and a back computer lab and staff offices. At least 6 participants arrived late after the first topic had been covered, and 2 departed early before most of the training had been completed. If it's important for your evaluation that you set the stage, the physical stage for what's happening, right? This would be a summary statement about what you physically observed in that space. Thoughts about this? Is this a good summary or not?
I think so. It gives you exactly who did what and how many people were there.
So Tina's right. If what you need to know is who did what, where the space was, how many people were there, sort of the administrative end, it's a great summary. The question would be, what are you trying to answer in the first place, right? Depending on what you're trying to answer, this could be a perfect summary, or this could be a horrendous summary. We don't know. So it's a great summary for the actual sort of nuts and bolts layout of the space. Take a look at this next one. During the group activity portion of the training, participants talked about how to create a successful marketing campaign. One person seemed to take a leadership role and asked for the group's ideas. In general, the group seemed comfortable with this person as the lead. Of the 6 participants, 4 were regularly engaged in conversation and 2 were quieter. Of those 2, 1 never spoke. There was a lot of turn taking and apologies for interrupting or talking over one another in the group. What kind of summary is this?
It's a
Like an
more
activity
descriptive.
summary.
Oh, there were two of you at the same time, Khalifa and then Danielle.
Sorry, I was saying it was a more descriptive, qualitative summary.
More descriptive, absolutely. Danielle, what
I
did
was
you have?
saying it was a description of the activity versus the number of people and how long they stayed.
So compared to our previous one, right, how many people were in the room, where the room was, who was there early, who wasn't. This one is about the activity. And also for me, when I read like a lot of like group dynamic stuff in it, right? Like who took the lead, how engaged people were, like how they were actually connecting with one another. So is this a good observation summary? What do we think?
If you don't need the numbers.
Again, it sort of depends what you need, right? What question you're answering. So if you don't need the numbers, if the layout and the space and the amount of time and all that doesn't matter, and it's more about how the group dynamic flows and what the activity was, this could be a great summary. Again, depending on your evaluation question, either one of those could be fantastic observation summaries. The takeaway point here is that there's no way to write, there's no single way to do it. It depends on what you're trying to figure out. Let's look at one more. This should look familiar to at least one of the organizations here. At all sites, ongoing projects were underway and examples of participant work were readily visible. Teaching artists were demonstrating skills, giving youth opportunities to try the skills, and providing one-on-one assistance as needed. Hartford Performs, if you look at your historical files, you'll notice that this comes from one of your previous reports when you did observation. So what's really good about this observation summary? What's good about this as a summary?
It tells you what was happening there during the session.
Yeah, right. So it's telling you what you have as a headline. Here's your headline. Then it's telling you what was going on more specifically, demonstrating skills, giving youth opportunities to try them, and providing one-on-one assistance. And how do we know that it happened more than once? That this is multiple observations? How do we know that it's multiple observations? Tina, go ahead.
It says that it's all sites.
Yeah, right? So it's at all sites. So we observed it's assumed that we've observed various sites here. And we're seeing this consistently across all sites. So it's a summary statement. So again, with our observation data, we're looking across our completed protocols and looking for themes that come up. Depending on what we're hoping to answer, depending on what that evaluation question was, those summaries, right, those themes, and therefore the summary that come up and the summaries that are developed from those themes will look different. If you all are analyzing observation data, like the 3 or 4 of you that are, we will work more directly together one-on-one on it. But the takeaway here is that it's not always going to look the same. We're creating summary statements from what we see across those protocols. Talk about interviews. So interview data, which a subset of you have as well, has some pretty specific steps that we take when we analyze interview data. You have to carve out a lot of time and this counts for interviews and focus groups, by the way. You have to carve out a lot of time to analyze interview and focus group data. And the reason is it's pretty labor intensive. It's worth being really explicit here that when we, last session, when we did quantitative data, we didn't spend a lot of time on the analysis part, right? Because SurveyMonkey or Excel or Qualtrics or these tools that we all use, Google Forms, Microsoft Office Forms, they do a lot of the analysis for you. When it comes to qualitative data, you're doing a lot of that analysis yourself, right? So we're going to spend more time on how you actually do it. There are programs that you can purchase that will do qualitative analysis for you. But for the type of work that we're doing and the type of analysis that we need, it would be really, 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 it would be a stretch to get those programs and that sort of support. And quite frankly, it's not perfect anyway. So assume that any qualitative analysis you're doing yourself. So what you're going to do first is you're going to read all of your completed interviews, right? You've done all these interviews or all these focus groups. You go through and you read them and reread them and reread them until you're comfortable with them. Then we're going to go through these steps like a couple of times. So don't worry about it on the first go round. You record general summaries or notes or memos. You might have heard the term if you took like an anthropology class or a sociology class, you've heard the term memoing. Memoing is a fancy way of saying, as I'm reading through these notes, I am jotting down on the side or on another piece of paper what keeps coming up in my head, right? So, or what, not even what's coming up in my head, but what I'm seeing repeatedly. I am jotting down little notes about what is popping up here. So I'm rereading these over and over again. And I might say, hey, this is the third time someone has mentioned X. Or why is this always so negative? Or people are really happy with Vic Marie, right? Like whatever is popping, whatever I keep seeing, I am jotting down in a margin or on a separate piece of paper. This is going to be the start of my codes or my themes. So encoding is a whole thing we're going to talk about in a minute. But so just hold that part for now. And we're jotting down these notes that are coming up. Then we're going to summarize the data that we coded, more on that in a sec. And lastly, we go back and we pull quotes once we have our findings, and those quotes help illustrate the findings. So here's our finding, and then here's a quote that illustrates it. So how do we do steps 3 and 4 in particular? What are we talking about when we're talking about coding and summarizing codes? So codes, let me actually go to the next slide first. Hold on, I'm going to jump around a little bit to talk about this part. There are 2 types of codes. Codes are things that we are applying to data to group them, right? So they are, if you've ever been online and you see text that has a tag, like this is tagged as a particular thing. It's basically a bucket. And you're saying, I am taking this text segment and I'm putting it in this bucket. because this bucket catches, it kind of explains what it is. And then I'm taking this text segment and I'm putting it in this bucket. So we are grouping them into these buckets. The codes are the buckets. There are two types of codes that we can use when we are analyzing qualitative or word-based data. Some of those we predetermine, and those are called a priori or deductive codes. And then some of them come up naturally as we're reading the information. Those are inductive codes. The only reason you need to know this language is if you see it referenced somewhere else and you want to be like, yeah, I know what I'm talking about, right? I know what you're talking about. I don't care that you know the terms, but it's important to know that you can either pre-establish codes or let them naturally emerge from your data set. So if you are doing a survey about people's favorite desserts, and you're asking, or an interview, excuse me, about people's favorite desserts, and you're asking people what their favorite desserts are, why they're their favorites, how they would describe them, when they like to eat them, etc. what are some codes or some buckets that people's responses might fall into? What do you think? We're not looking for answer options. We're looking for things that might be themes that come up across their answers. So if you say, why is something your favorite dessert? What are some of the categories of answers or buckets of answers we might get? We might hear references to what?
Salty, sweet.
So one of the buckets, right, might be salty, might be sweet. More general bucket within that might be taste, or around that might be taste. So one, right, one of the areas that people might talk about might be the taste, and within that it might be salty or sweet. Texture, another one, great, right? We might hear some answers around texture. What else? Family traditions, love that. We might hear some answers around like social events or scenarios or tradition, right? Another reason why it could be a favorite. What else might we hear? If you say to someone, why is X your favorite dessert? Health, absolutely, right? So we might hear some answers around health. These are all, what you all just did was you came up with deductive codes, right? Based on what might reasonably make sense for the question that we're asking. These are some categories where we might see the answers fall. So what we would do in this case is we would make a list of those codes. We would sit with our team the way we just did right now, more than 60 seconds worth, right? But we would sit and we would say, let's look at this question based on what we know. We are the experts in our programming. Based on what we know about our programming, what are some buckets or some codes that we might expect to see? And we would write those down. And then we would give everyone that's analyzing that data a copy of those codes. And we would say, as you're going through these interviews, either if you're on your computer or print it out, you flag, you circle, right? So if I wish I had an interview protocol here, but I would circle this text segment and I would say health, right? I would use the codes and I would circle this one and I would say flavor. And I would circle this one and I would say family tradition or whatever my codes are. And I would basically pick the text segments, right, from my, can you see that? Pick the text segments as I go through and flag them each and put them into these different buckets. The way, when I was in grad school, this is like one of those like back in my day things, we used to print these out, all of our transcripts, and we would sit with, and I still do it, I have them on my desk, we would sit with multiple colors of highlighters. And every highlighter would be a different theme. So if I had 6 themes, I had 6 different colors, and you would highlight the text that matched with the theme. So if it was, in this case, health, health is all yellow. All the segments that were health were highlighted in yellow. All the segments that are flavor might be highlighted in red, right? And you just go through and you physically highlight in the color that you want the different text segments. You can do that same thing online if you're working in, a Word document. You highlight the text segments based on the color, or you select them and you add a comment based on the theme that exists for that piece. Some people do it in spreadsheets. You copy and paste the text segment into a cell, and in the next column, you can set up a drop down and you pick from the drop down what that theme is. When you have pre-established themes, you group them into those themes. Guess what ends up, what do you think you do next? You go through, you assign all of the text to your themes. Now you have all this pretty paper with all this highlighting, or you have all these Word documents with all these comments. What do you think the logical thing is that we would do next with it?
Find out what was most commonly talked about.
So you're a step ahead of us. Before we even get there, what do we need to do with it? What is that?
Numerical value.
Say that again, Christy?
Assign a numerical value.
Don't even need to do that.
Okay.
You're giving yourself extra work. I love where you're going with it though. Why are you assigning to what end, right? If you're assigning numerical value, what is that going to do? It's assumed in both Christy and Tina's comments what we're doing next. Don't overthink it. What are you going to do after everything is highlighted in these different colors? What is the next natural thing you're going to do? I'm giving you all really cryptic questions. I know it's hard to.
I'm thinking put them in the bucket, but that's kind of putting them in categories.
But that's it, right? It's assumed in both of your statements. You're going to group them. You're going to physically move them around and group them by those topics, right? So you're going to create a new Word document that says health. And underneath health, you're going to write all of those ones that were in whatever color health was. You're going to physically group them together. And you're going to read now, because up until now, we've been reading it in order of the transcript. Now we're going to reread everything in order, but grouped by the theme. So anything that was health, we're going to read together now. Anything that was flavor, we're going to read together now. Anything that was social event, we're going to read together now. So we're reading the same stuff, but we're reading it in a different context. And so now if I'm reading all of the health codes, right, all of the text segments that were somehow related to health, what am I going to do? One of two things is going to happen. Tina already told us one. We might summarize it, right? So what are we saying across all of these? What else might happen once I'm reading all of these things that I said were related to health? I'm reading everything in that bucket. What else might happen? This is a hard question. I will tell you the answer. You might discover that within that big fat bucket, there are smaller sub chunks, right? So there might be, we call them subcodes, groupings within the bucket, groupings within that big code that make sense to further sort of delineate. And then in that case, we would say, all right, well, this one's health, but it's really this. We heard that before when someone said salty and sweet, right? Maybe the bucket is flavor. We put everything in that flavor bucket. We go back and we read them and go, you know, within this flavor bucket, there's some subcategories. 5 or 6 of these are about it being sweet. 5 or 6 of them are about it being salty. 10 of them are about it being, I don't know, bitter. That's probably not the right answer for why it's your favorite dessert, but to each their own. And so then you have subcategories. That's important because your findings will reflect that. So you'll say, look, a whole bunch of people talked about it being flavor that made this their favorite dessert. But within flavor, right, we had about a third that really liked sweet. We had a bunch that really liked salty. Surprisingly, the most popular was bitter. So you've created subcodes within or subgroups within those codes. This is where it takes up a lot of room because once you create those subcodes, guess what you have to do? Go back and check all of your text to make sure that you can now group it into those subcodes. So it's a really iterative process when you're coding. You come up with some codes, you code everything into those, then looking at those, you might come up with new codes. So you go back and check based on those new codes, then you check those, and it's sort of cyclical and iterative like that until you get to a place where you're like, this is a pretty good summary. This is a pretty good breakdown, right? Not summary, but breakdown. This is a pretty good breakdown. I feel good about it. And now can I come up with a headline for each of these? Does that make sense? Tell me the truth. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I'm getting thumbs up or I'm getting nothing from people. So I don't know what that means. All right. So the process of qualitative coding and the practice of qualitative coding is only really like totally makes sense when you do it. And you get better at it as you do it. So in like 10 minutes, we're gonna actually do a coding exercise so you can practice it. But until then, I wanna go through a couple more steps. If this feels a little theoretical and this feels a little like what are you even talking about, Elena? That's okay, that's pretty normal. It feels better once you're doing it and once you're doing it repeatedly. I will also say, I code, so as an evaluator, I code qualitative data all the time. I have been coding qualitative data for, honestly, probably almost 30 years when I think about grad school too. And like 25 years between grad school and my professional work. I still get hung up on coding. I still struggle with it on occasion, more than just on occasion. I still call in peers and say, hey, how would you code this? Right, here are the codes I'm working with. Here's the text segment. How would you code this? Am I missing a code? What do we do here? I don't really know what it is. And when I'm working on projects with other people and we are all coding, because that's part of this is multiple people code the same information, right? And we compare. In almost every case, we have discrepancies. I want to say it again because it's important. When I am working with other evaluators, people that do this for a living, in almost every case, we have coding discrepancies. Meaning, we will take the same text segment and we will code it differently. And then we have to have conversation about it and say, well, I did it this way. I thought it was health. I did it this way. I thought it was flavor. Why? And then we come up, we compromise somewhere and go, all right, I see where that's coming from. Let's code all of these as flavor then. In almost every, not even in almost, in every single case of deep qualitative coding, there will be differences of opinion among coders. There is a lot of subjectivity to this process. It's why some people say it is not as valid or reliable as quantitative analysis, right? Because 2 + 2 will always be 4. This has a lot more subjectivity to it. I want to be clear that qualitative analysis can be just as valid and reliable as quantitative analysis. It just has to be done well and with rigor. And to do that, we have multiple coders looking at the same thing, doing the same work, coming back and checking across that. And so let me actually go backwards now in my slides here to talk about that. So we talked about this iterative process. We talked about organizing and summarizing. Well, we didn't talk about displaying our data yet. But where is this piece? Here we go. We are looking ultimately for consistency, right? So we are coding across people. And we are also recognizing that something can fall into multiple categories at once. So something can be both, just like I said in that example, it could be both health and flavor, for example. So it gets tough to do this. I don't want to minimize that, and I don't want to make it like, make it seem rosy. It takes a lot of time. It can be really tough to do. The best way to do it is to get as many people, not as many people as possible, to get multiple people, 2 to 3, coding each of your text segments. The size of your BEC teams, for the most part, is the exact number of people you want to be coding a data set. You would take, that's why it feels like it's a lot of work, because you're all going to take the same data set and you're all going to code the same data set. But that's where the intercoder reliability and the consistency come in. And then you're going to meet about it and you're going to say, how did you code these? And how did you code these? The exercise that we're going to do in a couple of minutes, we're all going to code the same thing. And I bet we're all going to have some variability in our answers too. So some reminders real quick. before we get to that exercise or some additional strategies. These a priori and inductive codes, right? The ones that you come up with before and the ones that you come up with during. We can mix those. You don't have to just come up with them before. You also don't have to just come up with them during. You can come up with some before, like we did here with the ice cream example or the dessert example, and then you can come up with some as you're doing it. If you decide that you only want to come up with some as you're doing it, right? So you're asking a question on a survey or in an interview, and you have no idea what the answers are going to be, and you have no possible idea what those codes could be. That's fine. You're going to come up with your codes as you're going. The process for doing that is that as you're reading the text segments, you are grouping them by ones that sound like they're talking about the same thing, that seem similar. And you're just going to group them. And you don't know what that category is, but like this person kind of talked about something that sounds like what this person kind of talked about. So I'm going to put them together. And you're basically putting them into buckets or organizing them into buckets without having a title on that bucket. And then after you're done, you go through, read all the ones that you grouped together and say, okay, is there a common theme here? Is there a title that I could put to this bucket? Those will be your codes. And then guess what you do? You go back and reread them all and now fit them into those buckets, right? So either way, it's an iterative process. You're either starting with some general buckets or starting with just grouping them together. But after your first and second pass, you're going through again. You're going to end up doing 4 or 5 passes of all of this by the time you've made it through. This step 3, I want to spend a minute on too. Test out sample entries. So remember when you all did your surveys, you put your surveys together. If you wanted to be really thorough, and I hope you were, what did most of you do or all of you do before you went and administered your survey to everybody? Do you remember? What's that best practice that we did before, like we went out to our whole population with it?
We did a pilot survey.
We did a pilot. What's a pilot, Kalitha?
Like a test run of the survey with a couple of folks.
You give it to a couple people, you have them take it, say, does this thing make sense? How long did it take, right? Same thing here. Before you go out and take all of your qualitative data, right, and share it with your team and say, go and analyze this, take a couple of segments with the codes that you came up with and just test it out. Do the codes make sense? Do we need to explain what they mean better? Are they too similar? Bless you. I see you sneezing. Are they different enough from one another? And test out a couple, tweak it the best you can before you all jump in and get started. After you do all of this, right? So you've coded everything, you've now grouped it into summary statements, or you've grouped it into your buckets. You've come up with some summary statements. So you look across that bucket and say, what do these have in common? Oh, people really like it when their desserts are connected to their social activities or their events, or have a really rich connection to family tradition. Even if they don't like the flavor, it's their favorite dessert because, you know, it reminds them of their childhood or something, whatever pops up. Once you do all of that, you have to present the information. We'll talk about visualization in after the break, but a really good practice before you present it is something that we call sense making, especially with qualitative data. It's the case with qualitative and with quantitative, but it's even more important, I would argue, with qualitative. Sense making is where you sit down with a group and say, here's what we saw in our qualitative data. Does this sound right? Right? That's pretty much what you're doing. You're checking if it sounds right to people. Who do you think those people are that we ought to be checking with? Who do we check that with? If we're checking if our findings make sense, who are we checking that with? Vic Marie, what do you think? Who are we checking that our findings make sense with?
I guess other team members.
Yeah, there's three groups, I think, that we should be checking with. One, our other team members, right? That could be BEC team members, that could be staff. So we take this back to our staff and say, here's what we found, right? Rick Marie nailed it. Here's what we found, staff. Does this make sense to you? Hartford Performs teams, you put Hartford Performs team. You put something in the chat, stakeholders. What do you mean by stakeholders?
So those that have a vested interest like in the organization. So it could be staff, it could be board members. So other individuals that have a vested interest in the organization.
Yep. So I would argue the second group, so the first one we want to check with is staff, peers. The second group we want to check with is external stakeholders, right? So could people that do not work for your organization, but that have a vested interest. So board members is a great example. There's a third group that is really important for us to check our data with before we go out and report it. Who do you think that would be? Yeah, Kara, the people that we interviewed, right? The participants. Yeah, Christy, exactly. The actual people that gave you the information in the first place. Go back to them or who they represent. If it's not those exact 10 or 12 people, right? They represent your participants or your staff, or whoever that sample was. Go back to that group and say, hey, everyone, we interviewed you and some of your peers 2 months ago. Here is what we deduced from those interviews. Here are the 5 big takeaways, right? Here's what we think we learned. We think you all want more of this, less of this, are happy with this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that sound right? And before we go out and finalize all of our stuff and share our findings, we check with those groups, in particular, the participants, to make sense of that data. Does it sound right? What else do we need to know? Right? What did we miss in our analysis? This is especially important. Again, it's important for quantitative data and for qualitative data. I would argue it's especially important for qualitative data when there's a little more subjectivity. There's a little more subjectivity to how we're analyzing and how we're interpreting it. So we want to ensure that the way that we are interpreting it is the way that it was intended by the folks as they were sharing it with us. So that is the last point on this slide. Make sense of the findings and this idea of going beyond the usual suspects. The usual suspects being ourselves. We always check it with our evaluation team, right? But we want to go beyond the evaluation team. We want to go to other staff. We want to go to external stakeholders, and we want to go to the participants when we can. Some of you in our one-on-one meetings have talked about this. You've said, our plan is to present this back to our participants, right? After we've analyzed it. Fantastic. Fantastic. That is an important step, not just for buy-in and as a thank you for participating and all of the other really good things that it brings, but it's an important step to ensure the accuracy of our data too. All right, let's try this out. So Betsy is going to put in the chat a Word document. This Word document is also available on the BEC website, but she linked it to you directly right in the chat. If you click on that link, it should be a Word document that looks like, through the magic of technology, kind of like this, right? Give me a thumbs up once you have it. Cool. I think most people have it. If you're looking at my little image, my little video, here's a printed out version of it. It looks like this. So this is responses from an open-ended survey. We have been provided 6 codes already. They are across the top. Management issues, physical environment, personnel practices, employee development, intergroup and interpersonal relations, and work structure. There was a question in a survey that was for a staff at an organization. What are some problems needing attention in your organization? Right, that was the question. What you see in the table are all of the answers to that survey question. People wrote these in. But the folks that gave this to us pre-established 6 buckets or codes, the ones that I just read to you up top, that they think these fall into. We think we'll see something about management. We think we'll see stuff about physical environment. We think we'll see stuff about personnel, about development, about intergroup dynamics, and about work structure. Our task as the evaluation team is to go through all of these open-ended answers and code them. So individually, you're each going to do this one-on-one or one by one, not as a group. So if you're in physical space with others, you have to work individually. So if you have a laptop, you can open it up yourselves or print out a couple of copies, whatever you need to do. Individually, you're going to go through and you're going to apply the code that you think best fits the text segment that you see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick so you can see me larger. Right? So you're going to apply the text segment, or the code from the top to each of the text segments. Just write the letters in parentheses. So if you think it's a management issue, you're just going to write an M on that line. You're going to do your best to work your way through all of these. If you can, if there's time, see if you can develop a summary statement for each of the buckets, each of the 6, based on what you put into them. The instructions make sense? Yes, cool. We're going to start this now. You can turn off your video. You can turn off your all of your stuff in a second. We're going to take this all the way to the break. So our break is at 10:30. So work on this until the break. If you magically finish early, I don't think you will, but if you magically finish early, you could take your break early. If you're still working on it through the break, it's up to you, or you can separate and take your break. But at 10:30, we are going on break and we're coming back together to talk about this at 10:40. So work on this individually, at least until 10:30, and then we come back together at 10:40. Got it? All right. Yeah. Patricia, you made a face when I asked how it went. How did it go for you all, or for you?
It's a little cumbersome because we didn't understand the structure of the organization. So I saw it as a single team with a single manager, and Claire saw it as a much larger organization with many teams, each with their own manager and then the manager of those managers.
So that's a really important point, because the more context you have, so if you were analyzing this for your own surveys, right, or your own interviews, then you're going to have a lot more context. The more context you have, the more you can fill in some of those gaps. The flip of that is the more context you have, the more information you have to fill in gaps that sometimes need to just stay gaps, right? Because we don't want to assume other things. So it is in this case, we had very little information, which forced us to make some assumptions. If we had too much, it could sway us the other way too. Let's go through now. There is a set of right answers for this. They are only right because it is what the team ended up using as their final codes, right? So they are right in the context relative to what the evaluation team ended up using. There is no objective right here, right? I think we've made that point pretty strongly already. So we're looking at this relative to where the evaluation team ended up landing on them. I'm going to share my screen. Give me a second. You should see the blank version right now, correct? All right, so I'm going to switch to the version with the Well, let's go through a couple of them. I don't think we're gonna have time to go through all of them one by one, but let's go through the first chunk before I switch it. There's not enough space for everyone. Just unmute and yell out or put into the chat what code you put in for this. There's not enough space for everyone. Oh, I'm gonna start picking on people. Kara, what'd you put for this one?
Physical environment.
Yeah. So I actually think, tell me if you agree or disagree, and Christy put the same thing in the chat, physical environment. I think some of the physical environment ones were easier than some of the other categories, right? So we had physical environment. Give me another one that was physical environment.
Office furniture is dated and needs
Yep.
replacement.
Yep, and one more.
More computer terminals.
Yeah. So the ones that were physical environment were pretty clear. Those were, or relatively to the relative to the other ones, pretty clear. Second one, there's favoritism and preferential treatment of staff. How did we code this? Crystal says management. What do others think? I see some nods. Anyone coded differently than management? Christy says IR, which is intergroup and interpersonal relations. Anyone else coded as IR? Yeah. So the evaluation team in this case coded this as IR. They said it was intergroup and interpersonal relations. You could make a case, right, for a couple of different things here. This is what I've noticed. A lot of my IRs overlapped with my M's, management, and a lot of my IRs also overlapped with my WS's, work structures. Some of the things that I thought might have been work structure related ended up being intergroup relations, but more about that in a second. Let's jump down to, we need a fourth one. We need more objective recruitment and hiring standards. How did you code that?
PP.
PP, personnel practices. I see a lot of nods. Anyone code it differently than PP? And I see it in the chat too, Vic, Marie, and Crystal. Did anyone code it differently? Yeah, so that one was PP, and I think PP was a little easier relative than some of the other ones to code as well. What else did you code PP in this table?
The next one.
Yep, more objective performance appraisals and reward systems. Let's do one more and then I'll show you the full list. How about there are leadership problems? Go down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th one down. There are leadership problems. How did you code that? I've read Sheena's lips. She said management. Crystal said management or employee development. What else did people have? I could see it being either one of those. In this case, the evaluation team coded it as management. So let's take a look at, I'm going to show you on the screen all of the answers. Again, based on how the evaluation team coded them. The ones with stars are the ones I got wrong, by the way, when I did this, the most recent time. To show like how with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I coded differently than they did. Just to drive home this point that there are a lot of answers, a lot of ways to go about this. Go ahead and take a minute if you want to check yours against theirs. So how do we do? Did anyone match theirs exactly? Did anyone get like just like less three or fewer different? Did anyone get 5 or fewer different? Yeah, couple nods. I noticed when I was doing mine, and this is the kind of thing, so again, this is the exact exercise we would do with our teams. We would take all of our data segments, answering one of the questions from our focus groups or interviews or surveys. We would list them out like this. Everyone would get the codes, and then they'd go through and they would do it, and we'd come back together and we would talk about them. I noticed a couple things when I was doing mine. Maybe you did something similar. One is there were a couple of categories for me, a couple of codes for me that seemed to overlap very often. I was using management and I was using WS, work structure, more than the evaluation team was, right? There were many places where they said it was IR, intergroup relations, that I flagged as a management issue or I flagged as a work structure issue. The takeaway that I get from that, right, if I were part of this evaluation team, is, hey, team, you know what we should have done? When we established these 6 codes up top, we should have operationalized them a little bit, right? We should have given a little bit of context and definition to what each one meant. Maybe if we had done that as an evaluation team, it would be clearer to us when to use each one. So maybe we could have had that conversation as a team on the front end and said, what do we mean by management issues? What are we including in that? What are we excluding from that? What do we mean by, right? It also means that after we've gone through and done this, we could go back as a group and talk about some of the ones where there were discrepancy and figure out where exactly it should sit. And finally, it reinforces that there is no single process, there is no single answer. We just need to make sure we're clear as a team on what each one is going to mean. If you're curious, Christy said earlier, you know, you go and add a numerical value to each of them. You do that in some cases. So here, on the right of my screen, I just popped the total number based on their coding, the total number in each of these categories. There were 3 that were management related. There were 3 that were physical environment related. There were 4 that were personnel practices, et cetera, et cetera. If you are the evaluation team and you are making one overarching statement about these findings based on just what you see in this box here, what is that statement going to be? What statement are you going to make? Go ahead, Tina. I see you on mute.
Well, I guess my answers were different, but I still kind of came up with the same statement of, well, towards my end of my statement, that there may need to be a shift in workplace culture, because it seems like there's a lot of negativity going on at this place.
Yeah, that's actually, it's a great statement, and it's a great point. Your specific codes and counts by code might be different. Your summary statement can still be the same, right? Like Tina got to the same place that this group would probably get to with their summary statement, even though she might have coded specific segments differently, because there were some overarching themes emerging from this data set, right? There was a lot of negativity in this data set. If I'm sharing with, if I'm an external evaluation group and I'm going in to meet with management, this might sound familiar, and management doesn't have time for all of the nuance of each of my codes and what I came up with, and they have time for one overarching statement, what we saw as being an issue. If I'm looking just at my counts by code right here, what statement is that going to be? Christy, you're unmuted. Does that mean you're ready to throw something in, or is that was that just a coincidence? Who wants to give us an overarching statement just based on the counts that we see here? Go ahead, Patricia. Oh, Yep, go ahead.
Based on the counts, interpersonal relations is a problem.
Yeah, this is where it gets a little dangerous, right? So we do all this work, we get a total count, and we say, oh, look, there's a lot of interpersonal relations issues. Hey, management, don't worry. It's not you. It's not the physical environment. It's not any of these other things. It's that there's interpersonal and intergroup relations as an issue. That could be really dangerous. So we have to tread lightly here when we come to analysis and reporting of qualitative data, because it's very easy to turn these data into a picture that might not be showing the full mosaic of pieces, right? You see how that could be risky if you take all of this and make it about intergroup relations and intergroup dynamics. There's a lot more to it than that, especially because, quite frankly, I would argue that at least half of those codes that were intergroup relations could have been work structure or management or something else. And if that were the case, management would be through the roof in their count, or work structure would be through the roof in their count. And that's something that an organization would take a lot more direct responsibility for. So we have to be careful about that. Yeah, please.
Claire and I were talking about maybe a 7th category called communications.
Mm-hmm.
That there may be a problem simply with communication.
That is a great example of how we might take existing a priori codes, code something, and as we read through them go, maybe our codes were not sufficient, right? And Patricia and Claire saw there's a bunch here around communications. So what would you do in that case? If you're like, oh, there could be another code here, how would we handle it? What would we go back and do?
Well, you could, well, first you would need to define what you mean by communication. What is that? And then after you define it, then you would bring it back out to the team and say, are other people thinking the same thing?
And then we would, and if so, we'd go back and we'd recode again, right?
Back and you would recode it, right?
Yep. So we'd bring that potential code up to our evaluation team. We'd talk about it. We would define it first. We'd go back, here's that iterative process. We'd go back and we'd recode, right? And then see how that one shows up. I want to highlight one other quick, we could spend the whole rest of our time analyzing this exercise, but I want to highlight just one other quick thing on it. These 2 rows here are highlighted in yellow on my document. There is favoritism and preferential treatment of staff, and we need objective performance appraisals and reward systems. Why do you think I highlighted these 2 in yellow?
Because they may be interconnected.
There's 2, yeah. So they're kind of 2 sides of the same coin. Is that the right term? Right? It could be that similar challenge just phrased in 2 different ways. And as a result, they are coded differently. When it's framed around the people, it's coded as intergroup relations. When it's framed around the system, it's coded as personnel practices. But it could be the same exact underlying issue. So we want to look out for this too. Sometimes our codes can get in our way, right? Because we are potentially segmenting things that ought to be looked at together anyway. You have people that will tell you as practice, they never go in with pre-existing codes, right? Ever, because you're already then setting some subjectivity to how you're going to analyze the data. There's some validity to that. If we had gone in just with this list in the first place and grouped them based on similar things and then made the codes, we'd probably have different groupings. We would have different groupings. And these 2 that are highlighted in yellow might end up being in the same group. It's why sometimes people will go in, you'll take an evaluation team, especially if you have a large team, if you have like at least 4 people. You sometimes have half the group use pre-existing a priori codes and half the group start from scratch and develop inductive codes as they go. And then they check with their partner, the other person that was doing the same thing on their analysis. And then those 2 groups come together and check on their analysis. If you have the resource for that kind of analysis, you are significantly increasing the likelihood that it's going to be robust. Does that make sense? All right, we're going to do another exercise. So I told you we were sandwiching the break with exercises. We're going to do another one. Oh, this is, by the way, this is what it looks like on the reporting side. So what you could do, this is the same thing we were just looking at, organized by theme, right? So the code is on the left and all the ones that fall within it are over on the right. You could envision a table like this in a report. In fact, if any of you have worked with external evaluators, you've probably gotten tables like this in your reports, where they say, here are the big themes and here's how they're grouped together. And in this case, they are reported by frequency of code. So all of our intergroup and interpersonal relations things, the things that there were 8 of, are up at the top. And then you work your way down to the ones that there were 3 of. We'll talk more about this in a little bit on the reporting side. All right, Betsy is going to put in anything else on that before we switch gears? Sorry, Betsy. Okay, so she just put for us in the chat a second Word document. Click right on that link and you're going to get a 2-pager. Lots of text. At the top, it says coding qualitative analysis activity 2 letters. Someone has already done the analysis for us in this case, right? So there's a little bit of a description up top. 2,000 letters were reviewed, and the analysis led to identification of specific themes that came up in people's experience with the hospitality industry. In the middle of that page, you see, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can actually see, we can see each other. So in the middle of that page, this bullet list here, you see the themes that emerged from the analysis: personalized service, fair deals, extra perks, et cetera, et cetera. You then have a little blurb, that's the summary, and then you have 4 excerpts from letters from customers, 1 through 4. You're going to take the next 5 minutes individually and read through this document and jot down your answers to the 3 questions on the second page. And then we're going to put you into groups so you can have some discussion around it, and then we'll debrief collectively. So take 5 minutes, read through this whole thing, and answer the 3 questions on the second page. We'll come back together at 11:05. Betsy, you're the best. How did this feel? Was this exercise easier, harder? How was it different than the previous one that we did?
I think it was a little harder.
A little bit harder. Why do you say that?
I don't know. I was just trying to figure out the questions and where they fit. And
Yeah, it seemed like it was like a little all over the place with,
Yeah.
you know, what was chosen to kind of pull out. That's one thing Danny and I were talking about. Like it was, yeah, a little all over the place.
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about it. What do you think the intention was in terms of key findings of the analysis? What were they? Forget the intention part. What were the key findings based on your read of it? Sheena, you're already unmuted, so go for it.
I mean, I guess the survey was given to obviously see how, you know, they were treating their visitors or whatever, but I just feel like there were like 3 nice comments based off the customer, and then that last one was just kind of like, you know, I don't know. I guess it's kind of weird for me to kind of summarize.
Someone else jump in. What did your group talk about? What were the key findings of the analysis? Hartford Performs. What does your team talk about?
Housekeeping is a major issue at this hotel or the hotel chain. Many people are very dissatisfied with the housekeeping or lack thereof.
Yep. So we heard we saw dissatisfaction with housekeeping. Anything else that came up as a key finding in your read of it? Circ team, what do you
It's
think?
not a survey.
Say that again?
It's not a survey that was given. It was just letters that folks, you know, submitted on an online forum.
That's an important piece of when we think about the strengths and the opportunities in the analysis. Let's come back to that because that ends up being a really important part of it. What else was one of the key findings in this analysis? Circ team, what do you have?
One of the things that Kara mentioned, and I didn't pick up on, so I was glad that she did, was that as I was reading through the description of, or the summary, that it mentioned that there were 80% or 78% of the reviews were not positive, and I jumped over that statistic and went right to the questions. And so I was like, oh, 1 out of 4 isn't bad. Somebody's always going to say that they're, and so Kara was like, yeah, but it's 80%. And I was like, wow, I missed that totally. So it definitely makes a difference if you pay attention to this, all of the words in the paragraph to get the true understanding of what they're really trying to tell you about the summary.
That's a really important part of it too. So 2 things for us to keep in mind as we go to the strengths and the weaknesses of the analysis in a minute. The source, right, the letters, and the proportion within that source that they reported as positive or negative before we look at the findings. What other findings did they come up with? So we saw that housekeeping was a huge issue. Were there any other big issues that came up in the analysis or in the findings? Tina, I saw you on mute. Were you going to add something?
I think it falls under the second question when we get there.
Okay, so someone else fill in what other pieces came up big in the analysis.
We also had
Luciana and then the Hartford Performance team.
we also had that, like, some of the comments, they kind of started off like with a negative tone, and then the hotel management was kind of quickly, they were able to make some type of resolution to increase like satisfaction.
All right, so I love you all you all are ready to jump into the strengths and weaknesses of this analysis, which I love. Keep that for when we talk about the use of these 4 excerpts, right? Because that's going to be important in a minute. But if someone said to you, what was the takeaway from the analysis of these 2,000 letters? It was housekeeping needs to clean up its act. And we also saw that billing and check-in, right, was a big issue. And friendly staff ends up being most important or being really important. The fact that those are the takeaways, but they get lost in this whole big thing is a challenge, is an issue in and of itself. That should be much clearer on the front end, right? It should have been super easy for any single person in this room to rattle off like, oh, this is what the takeaway was. And it wasn't. So that's an important piece of this analysis. Now, all that stuff that I asked you all to hold, let's talk about it. So what are the weaknesses of this analysis and what would have strengthened it? Let's start with this idea of it being letters. What is good or bad about the fact that they were letters that were submitted? Hartford Performs team. Oh, Sheena, go ahead.
There weren't any like specific like targets of what we were asking. They just sent in a letter based off of how they felt, which could have started one way and snowballed into something major. So it wasn't anything that was really like, so how did you like your stay? Like specific questions. And I don't pretend to know a whole lot about surveys. That's just what you said.
No, but right? No. It doesn't mean it's not a valid data source, right? It certainly is. Certainly is. But your point stands in that there wasn't a prompt that they were responding to. That's usually a survey or an interview or a focus group. That is the through line, is they're given a specific prompt and at least the responses that are in the same family of that prompt, right? When you are grouping together letters that are received, there are no guardrails on what they're analyzing. And just as a separate point, something to keep in mind, who's typically writing letters? People that are at the far two extremes of experience, right? If you had an average experience with any industry, any company, you're probably not writing a letter. If you had a horrible experience or you had an exemplary experience, you might go ahead and write a letter. So if you're analyzing letters that were received, we have to keep it in context that these are probably not representing the average experience. So to say that this is the experience of an average hotel goer probably isn't a fair thing to say, because the average hotel goer probably isn't writing you a letter. Right? Someone else mentioned another challenge or another weakness of the analysis. Talk to us about what else you saw as weak here.
We also noticed that it reported that 78% were complaints and 16% were compliments. But when you look at the customer responses, 3 out of 4 of them are glowing compliments and only 1 of them is a hard complaint. So we wanted those responses to replicate the percentages. So instead, 3 of those negative complaints and 1 of those positive complaints.
Yeah, and that's Christy in the CERC team. Is that what you identified too? So yeah, that between the two of you, you articulated it really, really nicely. That is a really important part of this that can go unseen. If you didn't catch that 78% were negative, and you see these 3 excerpts, right? 3 or 4 excerpts that are positive, what are you going to assume about the data? That's generally pretty positive, right? Because the excerpts are supposed to be representations of the full data set. These excerpts are not proportional representations of the full data set. So that is a huge issue here, huge issue. What else? Let's do one more, because again, we could probably talk about this for the next 35 minutes too. But this is an appetizer, a taste of the stuff. So give us one more weakness of the analysis. And actually, I'm going to show the third question too, because we're starting to talk about the quotes as well.
I think for me, the categories or the themes, it doesn't really say if they're in order. But you know, what's negative, positive, or some of these, if you read them, they're not, because they're not saying if they're negative or positive or the percentage. Like extra perks could be a positive thing. Maybe they have a ton of extra perks, where maybe in a comment it's talking about you have no extra.
Yeah.
So you don't really know what that means.
Exactly right. This is actually a personal pet peeve of mine. It's also just bad practice, but it is a personal pet peeve. A theme should not just be words, right? A theme should be a statement that it has some value to it. So personalized service, right? To Tina's point, did they not have personalized service? Was there a lot of personalized? What is the actual takeaway? What is the theme around fair deal? Was it a fair deal? Was it not, right? Like it needs to be a statement with some value judgment to it if it's going to be a finding statement. So I'm with you 1000% on this. Any other reactions to this exercise before we move on? The reason we spent time on this is because you will be outside of this evaluation project and the work that you're doing right now. You will be the recipient of and reader of just as many, if not more, evaluation reports, not just for your own organization, but out in the world. And part of the skill set that you all already have and that you're continuing to finesse and build is around being a good user of evaluation data too. So look at all of this as it comes in, whether you're producing it yourself and things to look for or not look for, but as others produce it too, and ensure that as you're getting it, you are a critical reader of it, because it is really easy with data to spin a story the way that we want it to be spun. And critical readers of data can see things like what you all just identified in that analysis and say, oh, maybe there's more to this than what meets the eye. Especially in about 30 seconds, as we look at data visualization, you will see sometimes it is with the best of intentions that data gets misinterpreted. It doesn't mean that it is malicious or that it is intentionally skewed a particular way. There's just only so much you can share in a summary or in a visual, right? And so it's easy to be misinterpreted. So I'm not suggesting it's done in a in a way that is intentionally skewed, but it's just the reality of having to take something that is more complex and presenting it in a more simplistic way. So let's look at some of the ways that we present with that as a big caveat, right? And as a big sort of red flag. Let's look at some of the ways that we present qualitative data. These slides, I'm biased, but these slides I think are really fun. Who has ever seen a word cloud? Word clouds have become increasingly popular in the last couple of years. They look kind of like this. Now, have you seen a word cloud, if other than this one? Right, you've probably seen something like this. How does a word cloud work? Like, what is it? What is this showing us? Who knows? Anybody? I'll just tell you. A word cloud is showing us the most commonly used words in a segment of data, segment of text. So the larger the word is, the more times it was said, yeah, like Marie said it, in that segment of text, right? So in this case, thousands of people have described their favorite teacher using only one word. Here are a few of them. Give me 3 of the most commonly used words to describe teachers from this data set. Just unmute and yell them out.
Inspiring.
Inspiring right here. Yep. What else?
Passionate.
Yep, couldn't hear you, whoever just said something.
Passionate.
Passionate. Give me one more. One more.
Caring.
Yep, caring, dedicated in the chat. And we know this because they're larger, right? They're larger font than the other ones. It literally comes down to that. The size of the word means something here. To make a word cloud, I'm going to put in the chat a link. Maybe if it works. There we go. You can literally take a minute right now, go to that website and create your own word cloud. When you go to that website, this is a free one. There are other paid ones that you can get. But if you go to, I'll share my screen so you can see. Right? Free word cloud generator. I click on this little button right here. And then right here in this box, I will copy and paste any text I want. Right? So I can go to my website. You can go to your own company, your organization's website. You can take a transcript of something. You could take a report. Let me go to services. And I'm going to copy and paste all of this text here, 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 here. And I'm going to paste it in right here. And I'm going to visualize it. Based on size, right? Are the most frequent or commonly used words on my website, on that page of my website. Evaluation, consulting, work, need, engagement. Sounds about right. Right? Like that's what I would generally expect. That is how you create a word cloud. You can change colors, you can change the number of words. Some of the limitations here. A lot of words will show up a lot. Now, good word cloud developers, let me stop sharing this, will automatically strip out words like the, and, it, right? Like the programs are built to, the good ones are built to strip those words out. But there might be something that shows up a lot just because of how you're asking and answering the question, and doesn't necessarily mean it's part of a theme. So a word cloud in and of itself might not be the only data collect or data visualization tool you want to use, but it could be a nice one in conjunction with other things. If you have a subscription to SurveyMonkey or to Qualtrics, I know those two in particular, they have built-in word clouds for all of your qualitative data. So the same way those programs will like crunch averages for you, right? Do some of the quantitative analysis. They will give you word clouds if you want them for any qualitative write-in spots that you have, which is kind of nice. It's a good way to visualize your data set before you delve into it. Here's another example of one. What one word best describes Barack Obama? This was a survey of 746 people. What they did in this case was they not only gave you a cloud, this is actually more like a circle, based on the size, based on how often the term was said, but they also then gave you a color, right? So the human eye associates color with positive and negative. So in this case, anything that was a positive trait was in green. Anything that was a negative trait is in this orange color, and anything that is neutral was in this like more of a tan color. So it gives you a quick visual too, using not just size, but color in this case, as to good or bad. And we'll look at the use of color again in a minute. Questions or comments about word clouds? Okay. Quotes. Quotes are pretty much the most commonly used way that people display qualitative data. It could be in italics like this in a report. You can bold certain pieces of it, right? These are all different ways that you can present a quote, but the takeaway is it's showing people's responses in their own words. They're great to embed throughout reports, whether you are using qualitative or quantitative data. Your quotes, though, as we learned from our analysis, as our colleagues pointed out, your quotes should represent the large proportion of your data set. So unless you are specifically saying, here is an outlier, and then showing the quote, the assumption is that the quote that you're giving is not a one-off, but it's representing what else was in your data set, and it's exemplifying the finding that it's going with. Questions about that? All right, one of my favorites is up next. The marriage of qualitative and quantitative data. Cool tool to use for our planning to do graphs. In this case, we have a graph here, a bar graph, right? Vertical bar graph that shows quantitative counts. These are counts of people's experience. How many people thought it was excellent? What proportion thought it was good? What proportion was mixed, etc. But then what they did was they used pullouts to show a quote that exemplifies that answer. So remember before we said in a lot of your surveys, you have, would you come back to this program? Yes, no, please explain why. This would be a great place to use a display like this, where you can say the proportion that said yes, the proportion that said no, and then either a narrative statement or a quote, right? In this case, these are quotes that exemplifies the why. You are displaying the quantitative and the qualitative data together in one visual. Questions about this one or reactions to this? Okay. Images and icons. There are at least 2 programs that in their survey, the 2 of you, that in your survey are, or in your data collection, are including opportunities to upload documents, photos, visuals, examples, etc., right? Those images are fantastic things to include as part of qualitative data findings. Research tells us that when people see a chunk of text, they are likely to remember 10% of that 3 days later. 10% of the text after 3 days. However, when people see a chunk of text combined with a relevant image that goes with that text, they are likely to recall 65% of that 3 days later. right? No, just text, 10%. Text with a relevant image, 65%. So if you are sharing qualitative data, which tends to be very narrative and text heavy, it's very helpful to add a visual. It could be a photo, it could be an icon, it could even be old school 1990s clip art, but just add something that is relevant to increase the likelihood that people will, in the first place, pay attention to it, and in the second place, recall it later. Even that table that we looked at really, really quickly before for our activity, let me pull it up. Same table, right? When we add some visuals, these are just clip art icons from PowerPoint. When we add some visuals, some icons to the same table from our first activity, people pay more attention to it. Questions or comments about any of this? All right, I think there's one more. Yeah, so this one's pretty interesting. It's actually pretty cool. So with qualitative data, we know we have a significant amount of text, right? Always. And when we code, especially in that old school scenario that I explained before with the highlighters, right? We're highlighting different themes in different colors. So in this case, we are showing the breadth of the text that we have. This is how much text we have. And we are showing some color coding to show a quick visual comparison. Sometimes we are presenting that within one set of data, right? So you could take those 2,000 letters and that second activity that we did and highlight how much of that was positive versus how much of that was negative, and you'll instantly see that 80%-ish was negative, right? You can also do that by theme. So imagine if we took those 2,000 letters and we highlighted them by theme, you could very quickly see, wow, hygiene and cleanliness is a big issue because the color for hygiene and cleanliness would pop up a lot. Or you could do it as a comparison to some other external force. In this case, what we're looking at here, I know it's tiny, tiny, but the text does not matter, right? We're showing the color coding. So what we're showing here is, this is from a Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton debate when they were vying against each other for the presidency. And it's showing during one of their debates, how much of what they said was what was wrong with the country, which is the red text, and what's good about the country, which is the green text, right? Without knowing what any of this text actually says, because it's size 1 font, what do you take away from this analysis?
Seems like there's more negative than positive.
Overall, more negative than positive. Absolutely. Absolutely right. What else do you take away from this analysis? Anything else stick out?
One individual had a more negative viewpoint on the state of affairs than the other.
Yeah, so right. So between the two, and Vic Marie has it in the chat too, between the two, right, one seemed to, they're overall more negative than positive across both of them. One seemed to be more negative than the other relative to each other. Doesn't matter what the actual text is now, and this comes from the New York Times, and in their version of it, you can click on any one of these text segments and it pops up and you can read it, right? So it gives you the access to the actual data. But this is the bird's eye view of it, because the takeaway that they wanted you to have was the proportion that was negative, and that one of the candidates seemed to be relative to the other one more negative. So you could pick any data point and show it with this color coding texting. You could take your entire data set, right? You can say, how was your experience at our program? Highlight negative and positive and show the proportion. You could take your staff subset and highlight who's, what are the primary issues, and it's retention, or it's advancement or it's whatever, and highlight them and show visually the proportion that fall into each theme or bucket. It's a pretty effective way to show a lot of themes and data at once. Questions or reactions about this one? Okay. Sending you back into your groups one last time for 10 minutes. We're nearing the end here. This 10 minutes is yours, meaning use it to go through your own data collection methods, your surveys, your interview protocols, your observation protocols, and find at least one area where you have qualitative data, where people are answering a question with words, either text, like written or verbally, and talk about how you will analyze that data set. Will you come up with codes beforehand? And if so, spend a couple minutes thinking about what those codes might be based on the question. Will you develop codes as you go, right? After you read the information coming through, you won't have time to get to too many, but if you get through the first and have time to get to a second, go to a second. The idea here is look through, it's probably, unless you have an interview or a focus group, you might have to look inside your survey for these text fields. So find your first qualitative data collection point and start talking about what you're going to do for that analysis. We will come back together at 11:55 for final wrap up and discussion. Okay? What burning questions do you have that make sense to discuss as a group? Nothing? How are we feeling about this? Give me a liker scale. Oh, that was quick. A bunch of thumbs up really quick. Do we like qualitative data? No? All right. Thumbs went down pretty quickly. I'm going to take us to our wrap-up slide. A bunch of next steps. Number one, as always, we have a session survey. It is short, less than 5 minutes. Betsy is she's so good. She put already the link to it in the chat. Don't take it while we're talking, but like at 12 o'clock when we're wrapped up, take it really quickly. Feedback is helpful. We only have 2 more group sessions together, but I promise I will read these and incorporate them into our last 2 to the extent that I can. So give us all the survey feedback. Let us know how this session landed for you. And after that, email me any questions or concerns or comments that you have. That could either be about today's content, that could be about your survey analysis plan that you're going to review with your team, that can be about whatever. Don't be a stranger. Number 3, some of you all, I'm really impressed with your sleuthing, already found this link and already set up your July one-on-ones. If you haven't yet, when Monica sends out the follow-up email later today that has the slide deck and everything else, there will be a link to sign up for your July one-on-one. July and August are both one-on-one sessions. You all and me individually, where you are. These could be active working meetings where we're analyzing data. This could be troubleshooting if you're not getting enough responses. Wherever you are in the process, we'll meet in July and we'll meet in August. When you go to register for your July meeting, normally there's a 1-week window that we're meeting, right? For July and for August, there will be multi-week windows. For July, it's a 2-week window, just because I know people's calendars are tougher in the summer and with programming, either programming, I feel like, or you're on vacation. It's one of those 2 extremes. If the windows that are offered in July do not work for your team, please just send me an email. We will find another one. So start with the Calendly, and if something doesn't work there, send me an email. So sign up for your July one-on-one, continue to collect your data if you're actively doing that. And then homework to actually do is what you just started. Go through any qualitative data collection points that you have. Again, unless you have an interview or a focus group, for most of you, those qualitative elements are embedded in your survey. Go through those the same way you did for your quantitative data and just put in a comment explaining how you will analyze it. Are you going to establish codes before? Are you going to establish codes after? What are you going to do with that data? It's the same thing you did with the quantitative data. You're just doing it for your qualitative elements now. Does that make sense? Yes, okay. So session survey, sign up for your July session, keep doing what you're doing, reach out with questions, and figure out how you're going to analyze that qualitative data. It's a lot, but we're doing it. We are actively doing the thing right now. You're in it, it's happening. The train has left the station. We're moving toward our destination, whatever other analogies we have. It's 12 o'clock. With this, I will leave you. Thank you. I know this was a heavy session. It was a lot of content. I'll stick around for a minute if anyone has questions. Otherwise, I will talk to you soon. And that's all. Have a great day. See you.